see you, Don.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming here this morning. My name's John Weingart. I work here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and excuse me, we're delighted that so many people are here. We're also live streaming this event. We've been having these programs the morning after each primary and general election since June of the year 2000. And I was thinking on the way in this morning of the three major things that are different now than was the case after the primaries in the year 2000. In 2000, George W. Bush had defeated John McCain and become the Republican nominee, and Al Gore had defeated Bill Bradley to become the Democratic nominee. And while there was some suspense in those races, there were a lot of political experts who had basically predicted that outcome, and it wasn't exactly shocking to anybody. That's not exactly the case this year. Second difference is that then the people on the panel, or people who followed politics for a living, had access to some information that the rest of us didn't have. That it wasn't the way it is now, that we can all quote what Tom Friedman said last night, or what was on MSNBC, or what was here, or what was there. So there's a different, and it's not good or bad, maybe it's good, that there's a different body of knowledge, that the people who are political junkies are all taking the same drugs, I guess, to maintain our habit. And the third thing is just that the technology has changed so that we are live streaming this event, which we did not know was a concept in the year 2000. We'll also, when we get to the question and answer part of the morning, we will be accepting questions from you, but also we'll be accepting them on Twitter. Again, a change from what happened in 2000. I want to begin, welcome Governor Florio, who is here this morning. Governor Florio. Governor Florio had called me about a month ago to suggest that we have some programs for students in the fall, and we start playing them now on the general theme of what the hell's going on.
As soon as you find out, will you let us
yeah, well,
know?
Does anybody know?
Right.
Does anybody know?
Right. So with that as a sort of undercurrent of a theme for the morning, we have a panel of really experts here. Loretta Weinberg, the state senator from the 37th District. Don Sico, the former executive director of the New Jersey State Assembly Republicans and a lobbyist in Trenton. And Mike Symons, who is now with 101.5 Radio, Statehouse. And Michael Hill, who's a correspondent with NJTV. So I'm going to ask all four of you just to start with some general impressions about the primary results yesterday, or the race in general, and where things are. I'll start, Michael, with you.
Good morning. Good morning. I think it's fascinating and encouraging for, and I'll take an academic approach to this, encouraging for the democracy, that regardless of who you support in this race, whether it's Trump, whether it's Secretary Clinton, or Senator Sanders, that so many people have registered to vote, and they're inspired to get out and to have their voices be heard. I hope between now and Election Day that the people who are so engaged in this process will take it upon themselves to educate themselves about the issues and the candidates. Because it's one thing to show up and to be inspired and to be engaged. It's a different thing to be educated going into the voting booth. And I hope for this democracy, that's what happens between now and November and Election Day. And from a journalist perspective, it has been, this has been almost in,
It's a gift.
I mean, really, it really, Don, you're right. Don said it's been a gift, and it has. And I think the CBS executive, Les Moonves, said it in a meeting recently. It came out about how much of a, Don, how much of a gift this has been to the news media to a certain extent. And I mean, it really has. I mean, you go back almost a year ago when one of the candidates announced that he was running, and almost wire to wire, he's been in the lead for the Republican Party. And when there was this first televised debate in the middle of summer, people engaged and tuned in record numbers. And I think that one event changed the dynamic of this race forever. You had that was on Fox, you had other networks trying to replicate that, and they did so, in some of them very poorly. But that one debate where the ratings were just through the roof, it changed the dynamic. And it made a much more fascinating race, a much more engaging race, and a race much more worthy, I think, of paying attention to.
Okay. Thanks. Mike? Mike, you want to?
Yeah, if the election's a gift, I guess part of the gift is that a lot of people are paying attention to news media. So I think it's incumbent on the news media to use the extra attention it's getting right now to do a good job and not just report on the entertainment part of what goes on, but report on some of the meat and potatoes part that people sometimes don't like to come for. They come to the restaurant for the other stuff, but serving the meat and potatoes while they're here. Thought the election last night was, in New Jersey at least, was kind of predictable. I mean, a lot of the drama had been taken out by now, not just from the Associated Press reporting Monday that Hillary Clinton had won the nomination, but also Trump having secured that nomination a while ago. You kind of knew leading up to it that it wasn't going to be a very close race just by how infrequently Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were here. They came a little early a couple of weeks ago, but for the most part, they spent their time in California, and it's kind of predictable. It's kind of sad. We almost had our moment in the sun, but it was taken away. And even just that one little part about getting to put Clinton over the top, even that got taken away on Monday. But it was kind of interesting, some of the results from last night's election, even though it was sort of predictable. There were a couple of counties in New Jersey where Bernie Sanders won. I think it was Sussex and Warren counties were the two counties where he had more votes than Clinton. And I need to look back. Those were two of the counties where you also saw there was a lot of interesting trends in voter registration, and Democrats switching their registration to Republican, Republicans switching to Democrats, or unaffiliated signing up with the Democratic Party. We didn't have numbers on that from 2008, which would have been the good time to compare that to, because that was the last time that there were contested races on both sides. If you compare now to 2012, on the Democratic side, there wasn't even a race 4 years ago, so that's not a great comparison. But the number of people who were signing up with parties seems to have gone up. The number of people who were switching parties seems to have gone up. So all that is sort of interesting. And I don't know what it says that those are the counties. I don't know if that means that those were hardcore Bernie Sanders supporters or if those were Republicans who thought they might want to cause a little bit of trouble. Similarly, on the Republican side of the election yesterday, if you look at the number of people who did write-ins, there were about 3 times, the percentage of write-ins on the Republican side were about 3 times higher than on the Democratic side. So I don't know if that is, I can't possibly vote for these folks, I'm going to write somebody else in, or, as I kind of suspect, they may have been people who are fans of Chris Christie who said, well, I know he's not in the race anymore, he's not on the ballot, but I'm going to write him in anyway. And at some point, when I have some time, I like to kind of look back at some of that. There are actually counties where you can't get that information, which I thought was really strange. Yeah, Mickey Mouse will get votes. Mickey Mouse will definitely get votes. But yeah, in past elections, I've called to counties and said, well, can I get a list of who the write-ins were? They said, well, we don't keep that. It's like, what do you mean you don't keep that? So if anybody tells you you never throw your vote away, apparently it is possible. So, I think that's all. Thanks.
Senator Weinberg.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would tend to doubt that anybody from Warren or Hunter and any Republican went in to vote in the Democratic primary there because Scott Garrett was having a primary fight. So I would assume that they didn't feel secure enough to do that. But, and I agree with you, Mike. I hope that we are going to get some meat and potatoes in the coverage. I was in Washington about a week ago on a gun safety conference at the White House. Pardon me while I drop names. And I had gone down the night before, and in the morning in the hotel room, I turned on MSNBC, Catch the News. There were 2 minutes about the war in Syria, 5 minutes about Bill Clinton's ex-girlfriends, and 5 minutes of Bill Cosby walking into court. That was MSNBC, by the way. So if the public is uninformed, it's the corporate media, pardon me, that might be somewhat responsible, and I guess the viewing public. But this morning, I feel a little giddy, I'm sorry. But it was quite a thrill the last 2 nights. It was a thrill even when the AP announced that she had clinched the nomination. I was by myself watching, and it was an overwhelming feeling. And then last night was the icing on the cake when the first woman to be nominated by a major political party for the office of presidency came out on the stage. And some of you saw this on my email. I immediately, the night before, in the AP, texted my 12-year-old granddaughter in California to try to engage her in the historic moment, that what this means for her future, only to find out from my daughter the next day that she can't read the text until the weekend because her phone is in a timeout for whatever the infraction of the rules were. But that is the truth. I was begging my daughter, can't you just let her look at the text? No, we're not opening the phone. So that's, kind of the dose of real life. Kind of made the circle for me. So it was a thrilling moment, and I said to another contemporary woman, contemporary to me, woman as we walked in the room, we really are dancing on the tables today. And somebody else said, we'll even take lampshades. So, thank you.
Don Sico, you're
Well,
not
thank
dancing
you.
on the table.
I want to congratulate all the women in the room. It was historic, and it is historic. It'll be historic when she actually receives the nomination in Philadelphia sometime towards the end of July, and then on the ballot in November. I'm honored to be, I'm rarely in the center, so I'm proud to be in the center. I'm honored to be on a panel with Mr. Hill and Mr. Symons and Majority Leader Weinberg, and in the room with Governor Florio. I think it's part of Rutgers' campaign, Let's Make Eagleton Great Again. I too was on the ballot yesterday. I was a delegate, as was my wife, as an alternate for John Kasich, and I lost my 3rd consecutive election. I lost the first one in the 1980s when I ran for city council in London, Ohio, and then I lost the second when I ran for school board the earlier part of this millennium. Not because this makes for good TV or for a good panel discussion, but I have prepared some remarks. I want to be a little bit careful in how I choose my words. As the only Republican on the panel, I believe, and perhaps the only Republican in the room, I'm not sure. But I do want to explain myself, so if you'll bear with me, I won't read from after that. I'll be 62 this summer. This will be my 12th presidential election, and it will be the very first in which I will not cast a ballot for president or vice president of the United States, and that's sad. I am an optimist by nature. I choose to go through life hoping for the best. It's just a better path. You get to the same place regardless of your outlook, so you might as well be cheerier on the way. But I am pessimistic about the future of America as I have been in my 61-plus years, and apparently I am not alone. They asked us questions on polls. Do you believe America is headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? Some pollsters even rotate right and wrong in order to be fair. The most recent time that question was asked was just last week when it was asked by Rasmussen of 2,500 Americans, a pretty large sample size, and 66%, 2 out of every 3 Americans believe we are headed in the wrong direction. Only 27% believe we are headed in the right direction. Now that would be astonishing news were it not for the fact that Americans have given pretty much the same assessment over the last 100 times they were asked this past year by more than a dozen polling firms. Americans are angry. They're depressed. They're pessimistic about the future. They feel the real pain of a stagnant economy. A CNBC survey found that 40% of the unemployed have stopped looking for a job. That translates into 4 million of our friends, neighbors, and family members. They have quit on America. Americans are confused, and some are frustrated by a culture that is changing near daily. Their belief systems are challenged routinely. Some feel unprotected against what Peggy Noonan described as a hostile, dominant culture. Americans are numbed by technological innovation that has given us the greatest ability to connect with one another in world history, but an inability to communicate with one another. And I'm sorry to report to Mr. Hill and Mr. Symons that Americans simply do not have a great deal of trust and confidence in the media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. Sadly, the last time Gallup asked the question, just this past fall, the number of Americans who trusted the media to tell them the truth fell to an historic low at 40%. Most Americans, a majority, do not trust the press, and that has been true in survey after survey since 2007. And now many, not all, not even a majority, I suspect, because many have found solace in the nominees, but more Americans than during any national election that I have witnessed are disappointed, angry, and bitter about a process that has left them with 2 candidates for president they simply cannot support. And that is true on both sides of the political aisle. I am one of them. I cannot support my party's nominee. The reasons are many, and I guess I am forced to. I will elaborate, but I'm mindful that I invited here this morning to present a Republican view. And I believe I am alone in that task here. But barring a reawakening in Cleveland this July that would rival the second coming, Mr. Trump is going to be our nominee. I can sum up my thoughts on Mr. Trump, who I have met with, whom I have dined with, and whom I have been lobbied by, in the words of someone else, someone I respect greatly, Charles Murray. Charles said, "In my view, Donald Trump is unfit to be president in ways that apply to no other candidate in the 2 major political parties throughout American history." And so while I cannot and will not make the case on why he should win in November and become president of the United States, because I do not believe that, I will try to explain why so many support him. In that way, I hope to at least to partially fulfill my obligation to Eagleton for a balanced point of view on this panel. The second part of my task is easier, however, and all of the goodwill I may have engendered with the women in the room and others with regards to Mrs. Clinton will now fly out the window. I cannot support Mrs. Clinton. I find her to be dishonest. I find her to be corrupt. I would never vote to grant her more power. I do not believe she has our collective best interests at heart, and I believe that has been borne out time after time after time during her and her husband's long political career. Some have characterized this election as a classic lesser of 2 evils election. But choosing the lesser of 2 evils is still choosing evil, and I choose not to do that. Thanks.
So, I want to ask you all to think about, so here we are, and what can be done in this campaign that would be informative to voters, useful to the country? And I was thinking, partly when Don was speaking, but before, we've to some extent known these candidates for a long time. There's a book that Joseph Heller wrote about it when he was battling a disease, and he fell in love with his nurse. It's not fiction, the book, and he fell in love with his nurse and ended up marrying her, and he talks in the book about how surprising it was that they had this romance because they had nothing in common. And his example was that she thinks Donald Trump is interesting. And that book was in 1986. That's 30 years ago. And in 1986, Bill Clinton was in his, I guess, 4th term as governor of Arkansas. So both these people have been around a long time. So if you have roles in the campaign, what do you think can be done What's the most positive thing that can come out of this campaign or can happen over the next 5 months as we all continue to obsess about this?
It's apparently a question that we're not all
Right,
attempting
right,
to
yes,
answer.
right, yeah.
You know, of course, I respectfully agree with your standing up, Don, in terms of the nominee of the Republican Party. And of course, I disagree in terms of Secretary Clinton. She has been so maligned by 25 or 30 years of the Republican spin out there that people have started to buy into it. And that is also the same reason, in my humble opinion, that people feel about the media the way they do, because of the right-wing haranguing about how you can't trust the media, you can't trust what you're reading, you can't trust what you're watching. So finally, after years of this kind of brainwashing, people, more people than I would like to count, have bought into it. But what could come out of this is, again, that we have a woman running for president who has spent most of her adult life fighting for health care for everybody, well before it was fashionable, and got beaten up unmercifully because she was fighting for health care for all. And by the way, she was only the wife, so how dare he put her in charge of something that important? And she got beat up for that. Well, now she's going to be president, and maybe she can start implementing some of the dreams that she's had, whether it was for children's health care. And I know Governor Florio knows how many kids right here in New Jersey have been helped with health insurance because of the Children's Health Insurance Plan that was fostered, moved through by then First Lady Hillary Clinton. So we have a lot to learn. If the media could spend maybe a little bit longer than 30 seconds on a story, which is why, with all due respect, why I like listening to NPR, my car radio, because sometimes they actually spend 5 whole minutes explaining something that's going on in the world or giving us insight into it. So I think what the best thing that could come out of here is if the media decided, whether it's 101.5 or NJTV, even our own local outlets, to spend more than 30 seconds on what's going on in the world around us. And if you get the governor back on, I promise I'll call again.
On a Wednesday toward the end of every month.
I did that one year to, somebody dared me to do it, actually. We went outside. And I said, "This is Loretta from Teaneck," and I understand. It was predates you, Mike. They were all rubbing their hands together. Wait, to put the call.
You skipped to the front of the line.
I went right to the front of the line.
I go back to what I said originally, that I would hope that people would educate themselves about the candidates and their positions and their policies and things like that. But one of the things that strikes me as odd as I make that kind of hope is that people are, especially yesterday, wringing their hands, backing away from endorsements and things like that of one candidate. And because of what this candidate has been saying over the last week to 10 days about a judge who's handling one of his cases. And as I listened to the criticism yesterday and watched the hand-wringing, I wanted to ask out loud, where were these people when this candidate, who was not a candidate during the Obama presidency until the last year, when he was waiving a birth certificate, when he was making these other kinds of remarks, and a lot of people thought it was not based on any merit, based on someone's ethnicity. And I wonder, where were these people who were criticizing and hand-wringing yesterday, where were they when this whole birther movement was taking place? And where were the members of Congress who knew that this person was, for lack of a better word, wrong, where were they in standing up and saying you ought to stop? The birth certificate from Hawaii of the president is legitimate. The doctor verified it. His family verified it. So I guess to a certain extent, the question, where we are now begs this question. What did people expect ultimately with Donald Trump? If you watched him over the years, yes, he's an astute businessman. He's filed plenty of bankruptcies. He knows to get in, make a profit, get out when it's no longer profitable. But where were people? Where were people when this man was standing up and saying the things about the president that he was saying? And is he any different right now than the person who stood up and waved the birth certificate and made that an issue? And if he's not, then this is where we are.
In fairness, I think there were plenty of Republican elected officials who were dismissive and critical of the whole birther movement. And I think if you check the record, you'll find there were members of Congress, there were senators, there were governors who were dismissive of that. Why they didn't stop Trump, years before they had any suspicion or any inkling that he might be running for president is because who cared what a reality TV star said about anything? But the mistake, if there was a mistake, so I shouldn't characterize it as a mistake. What happened to the Republican Party was you had too large a field, too many debates, too many people who weren't willing to take on who they then considered early on not a serious candidate. And I was one of them, to be quite honest with you. I was somebody who said, when people said, oh, Donald Trump's going to be your nominee, I'm like, what are you, nuts? That's not going to happen. People are going to catch on. So I was wrong. And there are people in my business, there are people who, and this is my first, there are people who sit on these panels and people who go on TV shows who care more about being right, that having their predictions be right, having what they say be proven right, than they are about what it means to the country or to the state or to their locality. I'm not one of those people, and so I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong, and I was wrong about Mr. Trump, but that doesn't mean that I have to stand here and be satisfied and predict an outcome of an election that I think is a foregone conclusion, but we'll see. I lose either way, so it's I don't have a lot at stake here. But I think there were plenty. I think I'm not going to go back and Google it, but I think if we check, there were plenty of Republican elected officials, maybe not enough, but there were plenty who were dismissive of the whole birther movement and who spoke up. And why they didn't take on Mr. Trump is because, like I said, who cares?
Yeah, I agree that part of why Trump was able to succeed was because there were so many Republican candidates and the debates were large and unwieldy. I don't know if I necessarily agree that there were too many of them. I mean, anytime you have an audience and an opportunity to impart information, that's probably a good thing. I don't know how they could have structured the debates better, but when you had 8, 9 people on the stage, he was able to say things and there wouldn't be a lot of follow-up. And every candidate seemed to want to leave it to somebody else to be the guy who's going to take him down. I think they saw, was it Rick Perry was the first one who tried, and it hurt him. And basically his campaign ended early. So I think all the other candidates took from that, well, I'm not going to be the person who gets in front of that truck. I'll let somebody else do that. And then all of a sudden it was February and nobody had done it. And so I think one other thought I had as folks were talking and people were talking about, people being angry and all, is that, and a possible way that coverage of the campaign can evolve. If Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton don't talk about issues and things that are important to people, hopefully the news media then looks for the other candidates who will be on the ballot who may be providing that kind of information. The Libertarian nominee is polling at around 10% in the polls currently. That's not high enough to get him into any of the debates. You have to be at 15% in order to qualify. There's not a monetary requirement, like in New Jersey, to qualify for a debate as a third-party candidate. You have to raise a certain amount of money to show that you're viable. That's not one of the requirements, but you do have to show a viability in polls. So if Gary Johnson is providing, information on issues and is showing an appeal to people. I think that would be interesting if he gets into the debates ultimately and perhaps can force what seems likely to be a very personal, attack-driven, negative campaign, perhaps into stuff that is more important to people. If you look at the voter registration trends in New Jersey now, all the minor party, third party, independent, however you want to term them, they're a very small amount of the registrations in New Jersey. But from the end of January to the end of May, registrations in those third parties has gone up in New Jersey by around 75%. It's great, it's granted all the way up now to almost 0.2% of all registrants. So they're not threatening the two-party system at this point. But, if people talk about, people leaving New Jersey as voting with their feet kind of a thing, this is their way of saying that they're dissatisfied. When you have people signing up, the natural law party, which doesn't truly exist anymore. It did when New Jersey started recognizing third parties, and it remains an option on the ballot to register, but they're not an active party anymore. Their registration has gone up tenfold in the last 4 months, and that's got to be a protest. And all of the third parties, but the ones that have been recently recognized, like the Socialist Party, the ones that have been around for a longer, like the Libertarians, are all gaining in registrants. And as I said, they're not threatening the system at any point, but that's, to me, sort of like a leading indicator of anger, dissatisfaction, exasperation with what the two parties are up to right now.
Yeah, ask about the debates. Carl Golden had an interesting op-ed column over the weekend saying that the debates up till now have been too celebrity-driven, that there weren't enough knowledgeable reporters being the moderators and asking the questions, and that helped make them less informative and be more on the entertainment than the education scale. And it does seem like the audiences in the debates became much more much more players than in the past, where moderators would ask the audience to not to refrain from applauding or commenting, and the audience would obey. That, to the extent it was asked, it wasn't followed. If you, well, some of you may be in the position of framing debates for NJTV or 101.5, how could debates be put together this fall that would be helpful to the voters? Is there a way to do that, given the candidates we know we will have?
I don't know why there needs to be an audience
I don't either.
necessarily.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
there's a debate that doesn't involve, a town hall style meeting where the audience asks questions. I don't quite get that exactly. But, a lot of that is driven by just the behavior of the candidates involved. If you're a panelist at one of these debates and you're trying to get the candidates to stay on point and all the rest of that stuff, if they choose not to, you're kind of limited in how far you can force them to. Unless you're gonna, tase them in some way. You can't make them necessarily answer a question. You can't make them stop talking at a certain point. If you start yelling over them, then, you're the biased media, blah, 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 blah. So
Turn the microphones off?
Yeah, I guess that's possible. It's a really, if the candidates don't want to follow certain general standards of decorum, then it's really hard for a moderator to.
And that's sort of what happened. Pardon me, Don.
No, go ahead,
Yeah.
Michael.
And I think that's part of what happened with some of the debates is that as much as some of the panelists tried to focus on some of the issues, that the personalities with that large field in the Republican race, some of the personalities really kind of took over, and some of the personal vendettas that they may have had against each other sort of came out on stage. And it was hard, I think, for some of those debates to rein the candidates back in to focus on the issues. And so it was difficult. It became a show as opposed to something informative.
Yeah, I think as long as the debates, national debates, I think we can, and we do a better job here in New Jersey and with our local debates. But as long as the national debates are televised, and as long as those who are televising them care about revenue from advertising, then we're going to have the kinds of debates that we've had over the last couple of cycles. And we're going to have debates where the moderators and reporters asking the questions are going to try to get the candidates to fight one another, and they're going to not, who wants to sit and watch a debate about entitlement reform? And who wants to sit, and look at actuarial tables and what else we need to look at in order to do true reform of entitlements? And who wants to learn about the intricacies of NAFTA or the Pacific Rim Agreement? Nobody. And so as long as they're televised, but I'm not a media basher, I'm a former reporter. I think with the limited resources that the media that we have has, I think they do a pretty good job, but it's really incumbent upon all of us. We live in an age where you can find out almost anything you want to know about a candidate, about their position on issues, about, you could even study those issues in depth. You just need to take the time. And so it's really incumbent upon voters and Americans to do it. I don't blame the media for an uninformed electorate. I blame ourselves.
And I think to a certain extent too that we live in a society that where viewing habits have really dramatically changed, and a lot of our habits have changed, where people simply want to be entertained regardless of what it is that they do, whether it's a smartphone in their hand or a mobile device of some kind, or watching TV, whether it's sports, whether it's medicine, whether it's politics, whatever. People want to a certain extent, want to be entertained. And those debates, especially last summer, they were highly entertaining, if that's what you're into, really. And in terms of the networks and viewership, the networks absolutely, they loved it. People watched. And the point of the networks existing to a certain extent is to make a profit. If you can get people on stage where they're attacking each other and it's personal attacks and things like that, I'm sure some of the networks look at it and say, hey, better for the ratings. Who's next?
To follow up what you just said, Mike, I heard one of the pundits last night or this morning talking about Trump's speech with the teleprompter, and he said, I don't know what's worse, the wild Trump or the boring Trump. So when they tried to get him to stay on message, whether he succeeded or not, that was considered boring. So.
Let me ask about the congressional races in New Jersey. So we don't have a Senate race this year. We have 12 members of Congress, all incumbents running for re-election, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. So the Democrats, I suspect they were all for Hillary Clinton before now, but they certainly will be without ambiguity. For the 6 Republicans, Scott Garrett, who's the one considered to be facing a serious challenge, what do they do between now and November?
I think some of them have already said what they're going to do. So Congressman Lance has already endorsed our party's presumptive nominee. I am blessed to live in the 3rd Congressional District where Tom MacArthur is my congressman, and those of you who never heard of him and don't know him, he is a gem. This is a man who walks in through the Democratic cloakroom whenever he goes to the floor of the House of Representatives because he believes it's important to reach across the aisle and have conversations, and he's a man who lost a daughter at a young age, who cares passionately and spent many, many, many months in hospitals and waiting rooms and cares about the healthcare system and has tried to accomplish things. So in my congressional district, and he's got what I think is token opposition, I'm a little bit afraid that if there's a blowout in New Jersey that it could affect him, but I think he'll be okay. I've heard the story that Scott Garrett, and I've known Scott Garrett used to be an assemblyman when I was executive director of the assembly, and he chaired our insurance committee. So I've known him for a long time. We haven't kept in touch, but I've heard the reports of his demise cycle after cycle after cycle, and he always seems to come out on top. I don't study the 5th district up there, and so I'm not sure what its makeup is and how much trouble he might be in, but he does, I've observed that he does seem to survive at the end of the day.
Well, the 5th district has changed somewhat, starting with the last cycle as more of Bergen County was put into the district. And the new wrinkle is that we have a very well-funded candidate for a change. As most of you know, in order to get out the true information about how Scott Garrett votes, one needs resources in order to inform the people he supposedly represents. So with a strong top of the ticket, with a change in the district, and with the resources necessary, I think this might be the time when Scott Garrett doesn't come out on top. Josh Gottheimer, who, a young candidate who happens to have been a former speechwriter for Bill Clinton, and has done a remarkable job of raising funds. And in standing up, I've kind of led the charge on that with against Scott Garrett's homophobia, and calling on the financial banks to stop giving big money to him, and many of them have stood up and said they will stop giving big money, stop giving him any money because of his stand on human rights. They owe that to the customers who use their services. So I think we're seeing a change there, and hopefully if there's one congressman that we replace, I hope it's Scott Garrett.
It was interesting, one of the primaries that I don't think got a lot of attention yesterday was Leonard Lance, who was challenged, I think, for the fourth time by the same candidate. And one way of looking at it is that he won easily, 54 to 33%. But there were two candidates against him who together got 46% of the vote, who were both running to the right of Lance. So I think when people who observed Lance in the legislature, in the state legislature, are surprised that he votes more to the right than might have been predicted from his state legislative record, in terms of sort of political survival, you can understand from these returns why that would make some sense, aside from whatever he may think about the issues. But
right. I think in Lance's 2 years ago, when Lance defeated David Larson, Lance had the same 54% of the vote or so, except that it was just one alternative. So he won basically by 8 or 9 points, and this time it was closer to 20. So, you know, we'll see, I guess, whether I haven't read any coverage to know whether Larson intends to continue pursuing these primary challenges into the future. I did see something that Bill Palatucci had said, who's the Republican National Committeeman for New Jersey, and said basically like, hopefully these inter-party challenges will finally be over now. I think he's a supporter of Congressman Lance.
well, let me open this up to questions, more questions, short questions, please. And I always try to call on students first, but there aren't a lot here. So Nick, do you have a question? No.
Please wait for the microphone.
Not yet. Okay, all right. Yes, sir. And then
Sorry, can you wait for the microphone
identify who
and
you are.
identify yourself, your name, and where you're from, please?
My name is Leonard Gursky. I'm from East Brunswick. You spent a lot of time talking about the media and the entertainment value. And Mr. Sico, you said there's a lot of avenues for people to really get the policy issues. It's my belief that a great majority of Americans get their news and information from TV. How do you change it?
Well, at least you gave me the easy one. I'm not sure, you know, to a certain extent, it's incumbent upon the candidates. You know, the candidates are invited to participate in network interview programs, Face the Nation, Meet the Press, et cetera. They're invited to participate in network-sponsored debates. They're invited to, you know, sit with anchors and to discuss. You know, here's, you know, I'll give you a second reason why I'm not voting for president or vice president. I believe that words matter, and I believe that in order to persuasively communicate, those words have to come from your gut, from your heart, and from your mind. And if you leave one of those three out, that you cannot persuasively communicate. I believe that the candidate that is apparently going to be nominated by the Republicans only speaks from his gut and doesn't employ his heart or his mind, to a lesser extent his mind. And I believe that the candidate that the Democrats have nominated only uses her mind, that her words are so carefully parsed and nuanced and chosen that they cease to have meaning and people automatically disbelieve them. And so that's another reason. So it's so maybe, I believe I'm still an optimist when it comes to people, so I do believe that people can change. Maybe they'll persuasively communicate to us on the issues that matter to us when they're on these television programs. But to expect that, businesses that have to pay reporters and have to, keep the electricity on are going to change the way that they report the news, that's just not going to happen. There's going to be, the tweet of the week or the viral video taking up, a minute or two of the 30 minutes that, not even 30 minutes when you count the advertising, the 20 minutes or so they give us to relay the news, it's still going to be that. It's because that's what we want. That's what we're asking for. So, we have to change before they'll change. Like I said, I'm not going to bash the media because, that's not the way to get it done.
And I think, too, that the research is beginning to show. I think there was a Pew Research project that just showed that there are more people now getting their news from, I believe, social media than they are from TV.
That's great.
That's not good.
Part of what's an interesting trend to me, kind of relates to what you're talking about, is that news organizations now know better than ever what people actually read and what people actually watch online. We have all sorts of statistics that we get, reports as to what people are actually watching. And so what is being provided to people is the things that they actually watch. Like news organizations, whether you think it's for profit or whether it's for other reason, we now know what it is people want. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy probably, in that people gravitate toward that content, as we call it, and then that's what winds up being provided. But certain things can't be fought, that businesses need to make money to survive and things like that. That radio news stories, unless you're on NPR, are probably going to be 35 seconds long. But part of what we're trying to do over at 101.5 is that I do radio stories that appear on the radio, but I also write every day for our website. And the stories that I write each day for our website are basically the length of a Sunday story in a newspaper that I'm writing every day of the week. So what you're hearing on the radio, there's an expanded version of that online. And so hopefully people who find things interesting then know where to go find more of that kind of information. And honestly, people do need to pay some money for that. Becomes part of the problem, is that newspapers gave that away for so long that people don't want to pay money to have to read more than 10 stories a month on a website. But if nobody wants to pay the news organization money, then how can the news organization pay reporters? And that becomes its own whole spiral there too. So it's not precisely what you're talking about, but that ran through my head as folks were talking.
Hi, my name is.
You need to have a microphone.
Hi, my name is Liz Marquez. I'm from Milltown, New Jersey.
Put the microphone right next to your mouth.
Oh, right next. Is this good?
Yes.
Liz Marquez, Milltown, New Jersey. I have a question primarily for Mr. Sico, and it's this. I'm very upset by the fact that the advice that's been given to Donald Trump from all the talking heads, both sides of the aisle, seems to be, well, just sound more presidential and everything will be okay. And that to me is very bothersome. And my question to you would be, if at this point Donald Trump started to sound more boring more consistently, would that be acceptable to you? Or do we have enough evidence now that this man is unacceptable for president, that no matter how he tries to change his delivery method, would you vote for him if he changed that? Let me just cut to the chase.
I'm getting all the easy questions.
Right.
I watched his speech last night, and I wasn't moved. So, I don't believe you can. He's 69 years old. He's not going to change overnight. He's certainly not going to change in the next 5 months. And to all my Republican friends, of which I have many, you know, some of my best friends are Trump supporters. Let me repeat to you that I cannot and would not ever vote for Mrs. Clinton because I believe she's dishonest and I believe she's corrupt. So I wanted to repeat that because I'm here to represent a point of view as well, and there needs to be balance on the panel. But no, I don't think he can change, and I don't know that that's such good advice. You know, in order to understand what's happened with the Trump movement, I don't consider it a movement, but the Trump movement per se, you really need to understand, and I promised I wouldn't read, but I'm going to read one short thing. You really need to understand some of the people who are supporting him and what they're saying. So there was an article in Atlantic magazine last week, and it quotes a 22-year-old white man who is highly educated, went to Stanford, working in Silicon Valley, so not your prototypical Trump supporter. And here's what he said, why he's supporting Mr. Trump. And I'm not saying it's a good reason to support Mr. Trump. What I'm saying is it's important that if we're going to move forward as a nation and society, we need to understand some of what's going on in this country. So he said, for me personally, it's resistance against what San Francisco has been and what I see the country becoming in the form of the ultra-PC culture. That's where it's almost impossible to have a polite or constructive political discussion. You asked earlier what I would like to see as the outcome of this election. What I'd like to see is for us to be able to have conversations where we can discuss issues like abortion without one side calling the other side murderers and the other side calling them anti-women, where we can discuss, you know, all sorts of issues in this country as reasonable adults and maybe not come to an agreement, but maybe get a greater understanding of how the other side feels.
Governor. Okay, Governor Florio.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to your question to the panel before as to whether anything good has come out of this whole process. I think there is something that's good that's come out of it. There's a greater awareness now about the people in New Jersey, and in fact across the country, demanding a certain threshold of civility to be required. That you can't go out there and start calling people idiots, calling people stupid, telling people to shut up. You do that, after a while, you lose credibility. I mean, you become not a serious candidate, you become a cartoon. I mean, think Sarah Palin. I mean, the awareness of that, I think, is sunk in. And therefore, going forward, people, I hope, will moderate their behavior, as Don talked about, just have civility, have conversations going back and forth, and appreciate the fact that if you want respect, you have to be respectful. So I think that's a good development.
Well, I hope that's true, but that environment was set right here in New Jersey by the governor. And when nobody on either side of the aisle really stood up to that, I mean, I did a couple of times, but, you know, people being chased down the boardwalk by the governor of the state of New Jersey and called an idiot, or you're a jerk, or I'm gonna, the infamous bat incident. So that environment was set right here, and boy, everybody thought that was really good. That's a real Jersey guy attitude. And the good thing is that obviously people are starting to become aware.
And that's reinforcement for the proposition that it doesn't pay to go do that stuff.
Right, so,
In the aisle here?
Well, I agree with
Can
what
you
you
say
said.
your name, please?
Oh, yes, my name is Carol Dewar from East Brunswick, and I think you hit on a point about how we cannot discuss issues without going from one extreme, like murderers, to the other extreme, which is, you know, being too much of something else. I am really embarrassed about our political system, because Congress has been so divided and so divisive during the whole 8 years that I am not surprised that we had a Bernie Sanders on one end and a Donald Trump on the other end. And I'm not surprised that people are really gravitating to these people because they are not happy with the political system as it is. And that's my comment. I think that's the issue. That's the issue. I think the media is doing what they can, like you said, because they have to pay their bills and they are, have to have money and stuff like that. I'm saying that people want a change in the political system. And my question is, if they elect Donald Trump, will they get that change? Or if they elect Hillary Clinton, will it be the same as it was before and nobody's going to get anything done?
I predict that after the November election, the nation will be polarized there. So I'm pretty sure I'll be right. Here, there's a real irony about what's gone on in the past 7 or 8 years. It's not the full 8 years because the president had majority parties in both houses, and they even had 60 votes in the Senate at one point. And it was a short period of time. But the irony is that those in the Democratic Party blame the Republicans for there not being a greater bipartisanship and an ability to get things done for the nation. And those, of course, who are in the Republican Party blame the president. But here's the irony. The candidacy of Mr. Trump was borne out partly because the Republicans who were elected to majorities in the House and the Senate did not do enough to oppose the president in a lot of Republicans' views. And so they were very upset with Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and a lot of them that they didn't oppose the president more. So, you have on one side saying, well, the reason we're not getting anything done in Washington is because the Republicans are always opposing the president. And then you have the other side saying, the reason we're not getting anything done in Washington is because Republicans haven't opposed the president enough. So I'm not sure how we get past that. I predict, unless it is a landslide in November and Mrs. Clinton is elected by a landslide and receives, majorities in both houses, which I don't think will happen, then it is going to be polarized again. It's going to be polarized for the next 4 years, and I have no idea what we do about it. They don't pay me enough to figure that out.
Beth Heyer from Morris County with the League of Women Voters. And a number of you have alluded to the issue of social media and its omnipotence now. And a number of you have sort of said this in different ways, that we now have a plethora of information available to us, but nowhere near enough knowledge to process that information and put it in context. My question to the panel is, do you think we need to be spending more effort to put civics education back into the schools so that people understand how the government works? So that's my question. Do you think that that would be of value?
If I may, John, Beth, that is an excellent suggestion. I am constantly amazed at the level of lack of understanding of how our government works. Just based on letters I get into my office, dear congressperson. Or that they're, you can just see that they do not, I'm talking about adults who are educated enough to construct a sentence and a paragraph, and they have no understanding of how our government works. And I really believe that civics has to go back into the classroom, and this election could be a wonderful way to teach youngsters. We used to have a program in our middle school in Teaneck. During presidential elections, the fifth grades were divided into as if they were states, and they went through the entire convention process, and they elected their own president, and that president would be sworn in precisely at the same time that our real president was being sworn in. I used to be invited to come and swear in the president, and they even had some of the kids like Secret Service with little things in their ear. But these kids learned over the course of 6 or 8 months. So they went through a convention process and then an election. They learned about how you select a president in our country. We have got to get the basics back into our schools about that. And, I agree with what I think Carol talked about, us being able to communicate. I mean, I find myself in that situation I have a Facebook page, and I consistently let people on the other side of whatever issue I'm on engage me on that, as long as they're polite, which very often they are not, and then they get deleted or blocked. And so that I try that, but it is difficult to get anybody to move. And if I can, point of personal privilege, I'll talk about things like developing the smart gun technology. And all I ever hear from the other side is, it won't work, and I don't want to buy one. And I say, well, if it won't work, it won't be on the market. And if you don't want to buy one, don't. But you can't engage beyond that in conversation. And we need, and that's partially, I think, my responsibility as an elected official, which is why I try to do it, but it's time consuming. I mean, I'm usually doing that at midnight on Facebook. For those of you who follow me, you could see by the time. So it's very difficult, but it's the crux of the matter. And I find myself, we had an issue about women's health before the Senate Health Committee this week, and it was, both sides of the aisle have completely, both sides of the issue, I shouldn't say both sides of the aisle in this case, both sides of the issue have completely different outlooks on this. I don't know whether it's even possible to find common ground, but we've got to keep on working at it, and we certainly have to improve the education of our children.
More civics education would be great. There is some. My daughter, who's in 4th grade, will be visiting the Statehouse on Friday.
Oh.
So that'll be fun. So that would be interesting. But I think that I think it would be great. I also engage people on Facebook sometimes, and
I think we do each other every so often.
At my previous job, we were actually required, on any time that our stories were posted on Facebook, we were required to respond to everybody who commented on Facebook under our story. And I basically said, I'll correct errors of fact kind of thing, or provide additional information to keep a debate going, or if people ask a question, I will do that. But my health plan is not good enough for me to have to interact with all of them.
Right.
And the last thing that I would say is that more civics education would be great. I fear that in the polarized situation we are now, that even that would become controversial, in that there's civics, and then there's teachers introducing their own political view on something. And so I think it would be great. I would love if they could do that. I think that society would benefit from that. But I also think it would get messy.
I too think it would be great to have civics education and a better effort toward teaching civics education. But I'll say this about that. Jay Leno used to have a very popular segment on of going out and asking people the silliest of questions about who is the president of the United States. And adults would just stumble and fumble and bumble, and it would be hilarious to watch people in that way, in their responses. But as you sit back and really absorb it, just say, that really is sad.
Well, it's often in other elections, media organizations or polling organizations will assemble a sample of undecided voters and follow their thinking during the course of the campaign. And I suspect it's going to be more challenging to find undecided voters as this goes on. And I wanted to, speaking of technology, we have a number of tweets that I think are all from the same person. But just you don't have to respond to these, but just to put the topics on the table. What will it mean for the future of women in politics if Secretary Clinton wins on a ticket with a female vice president? With 2 potential vice president picks in New Jersey, Governor Christie and Senator Booker, will the parties in New Jersey organize to support these candidates? I like this one. Will the election impact the study of political science now that traditional prediction models have been challenged? And how should the Sanders campaign end its campaign while still holding Secretary Clinton to some of their platform points? So, addressing.
I think the 2016 presidential race is an excellent opportunity and has excellent material for historians and politicians and political scientists to study, probably from now until the end of eternity. Because, and really because it has, I don't think there has been another presumptive party nominee who didn't have political experience, going all the way back to, I think the last person may have been Dwight Eisenhower. And so this is fascinating how one candidate who's been, some people may be saying, has been plowing this road to the White House for what seems like an eternity. And then you have another one who, the first time he's running for public office, he's the presumptive nominee of the party. And all reasons of why and all the factors and things like that make it just a fascinating issue to study till the end of eternity.
Could I just comment on the civics question just quickly? Because there are still relatively small pockets of people in this room that I have not offended. And so I want to talk to the young people in the room. You know, you cannot wake up once every 4 years and realize there's an election going on and then just start paying attention. There's an intervening 4 years where you need to study the issues and pay attention. And, you know, the presidents and senators and governors of tomorrow are the freeholders, God forbid, mayors and, you know, councilmen of today. You need to get more involved more often and earlier, so.
Good point.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mr. Barkin from Edison, and I want to mention two situations. One was recently, the other night, I was listening to NYC, and a gentleman came on, and he, like Mr. Sico, referred to Hillary Clinton as a liar. And one of the examples he gave was that she says she was middle class, but really she was born in a wealthy family. Well, they did a fact check right on the spot and debunked that point of view. The other was when Senator Clinton was running against Barack Obama, and Senator McCain was talking to a woman who said that Senator Obama was a Muslim, and he shook his head and he said no. I think personally that the media can do more right on the spot, because whatever people say, if you don't know any better, that's the takeaway. So the question is, do you believe that the media, especially public networks, could do more right on the spot when somebody says something to do a fact check so that the people who are listening can come away with a more honest base of knowledge?
Sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. They could certainly do more. We could do more in lots of areas. It's not public media, but I think CNN the other day got a lot of attention for Donald Trump was saying, I forget what it was exactly, not even the Jake Tapper interview, he was saying something like, I can't even remember, he said, I never said such and such, and then a little crying that they put on the screen, they put in parentheses, yes he did. So I think there's certain attempt to kind of get a bearing and all the rest of that, but it's hard, especially when the information or misinformation comes as fast as it does. It can be hard to flag everything, and if you're doing a fact check, you better be 100% sure that you have your facts right, because if you inaccurately fact check somebody, then all your future fact checks will be deemed irrelevant.
And, you know, and during one of the debates too, I think it was on Fox, Chris Wallace, and they had heard Donald Trump say this several times on several issues. And so they prepared a series of graphics so that whenever they asked a certain question, they knew what Mr. Trump was going to say. And so they would put the graphic up to refute what he was saying and to challenge him. And Chris Wallace and Fox took some flack for that. But, you know, if you know what a candidate is going to say and what his or her position is, and you know what they may say likely is false or unbelievable or unlikely, whatever, then you have a responsibility to challenge. And if you can do it with the graphic showing that, look, here are the numbers here. The numbers don't lie. And I think that was whether it was against Mr. Trump or Mr. Sanders or Secretary Clinton, that's an excellent way to handle it.
I'm Nick. I'm from Bernards Township. In Marco Rubio's concession speech, he said to a heckler, "Don't worry, you won't get beat up at our rallies," which is a thing we have to say in 2016. And I guess I can't believe I'm asking this, but what role and how impactful do we think violence will play in the 2016 election? Is that something we need to be concerned against, both by and against Trump supporters?
I like to think that if we can get through the conventions, then maybe that'll subside a little bit, but I am kind of worried about what's going to happen, particularly in Cleveland for the Republican convention. You know, the event itself won't be contested, but I would imagine that there will be demonstrators outside, and then there will be supporters of the nominee. And so to me, that's kind of the inflection point. If we can get past that, okay. Which again, it's weird that we even have to have that conversation, but.
I think the country will be well served if somebody wins decisively. And if we have an election like 2000, I think that would be a real serious question. I mean, concern. Yes.
Can you wait for the microphone? Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay.
I'm Judy Marino from Somerset, and I have a question that John started way in the very beginning. And they talked about the polling that went on. Are you dissatisfied with government? And I've always thought, because I get the phone calls, and I must be on somebody's list, so I get the phone calls, and they said, "Are you dissatisfied with government?" And I say, "How much time do you have?" Because that is not the right question, gentlemen, and my esteemed woman. That is not the right question. The question is, tell me why. Because I think that so many people say that they are dissatisfied, but are you dissatisfied with Congress? Are you dissatisfied with this part of Congress? Are you dissatisfied with the president? What exactly is bugging you? Because I listened to Michael Smerconish the other day on POTUS, and he was talking about the autopsy that the Republicans had in 2012. And he was reading the list of things that they wanted to accomplish. And one of the things that, the third point, I believe, talked about, well, first of all, they said in 2008, we're just going to make Barack Obama a one-term president. But then so they were going to block anything. You know, Barack could say that the sky was blue, and they're going to argue about it. So I take issue with you, Mr. Sico. But the other point that I would like to make, and especially to the reporters, is dig down. That the third point of the Republican autopsy in 2012 talked about reach out to minorities, reach out to women, reach out to Latinos, reach out to African Americans. And all we've seen is the candidate doing exactly the opposite of all of this. And I wonder how much power does the party have? And a few months ago, this organization had Michael Steele here, who was absolutely fabulous. And he talked about the polarization, but I think that going back, dig down in the questions. That's what I'm trying to encourage you to do. Ask the question, why are you dissatisfied? Because I think people say, oh yeah, I'm pissed off, but and that's where we came from, and that's why we're here.
I think a follow-up question to that would be, what are you going to do about it? And are you going to encourage your children to go work in government or go work for candidates and your neighbors and yourself? But,
you know, to follow up your question, back in September, I think it was last year, when I was working on a story in outside Patterson in Passaic County, and this is right after Mr. Trump was talking about building a wall and so forth and so on and keeping certain people out. And I came across a man, young man, walking a dog, Latino man, and he saw me with the camera and the tripod and just struck up a friendly conversation. And we started talking about politics because we had just had one of those debates on TV. And he just volunteered. I didn't ask who he supported or anything like that. And he said that he supported Donald Trump. And he must have seen some look on my face. I can't imagine what kind of look I gave him. And so when he said that, I just looked at him and said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "No, wait. I I know what you think. I know what you think. So I put the camera and the tripod down. So I just said, okay, let me hear him out. And he said, look, I'm Hispanic. And I know what Mr. Trump has been saying about building a wall, about keeping certain people out, and blah, 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 blah. So I listened to that. And after listening for a good minute or so, I said, but why do you support him if he says these things, you know that these are his policies? And he said to me, and this is key, and this is what I explained to a lot of people about the magnetism of Mr. Trump, is that he said to me in a very passionate way, he's going to do something. He's going to do something. I mean, look at this man. He's rich. He's made this money. He's done this. He's done that. And he's going to do something. He's going to get in there. He's going to shake things up. And I know he's going to do something. And at that moment, I said, this man is going to be the Republican nominee. Because there are so many people who are looking past certain things and saying that they want somebody who's outside the usual political circles, whatever, and he's going to get in there and he's going to do something. Whether he's going to get up and say that he's going to punch somebody in the nose or whatever it is, the perception is that he's going to do something.
I think we're about out of time, and I wonder if anybody else on the panel has anything you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, I would just, I'm going to say something that's
Everyone be quiet, please.
strictly personal on my part because of the way, and Don Sico talked about how Hillary Clinton speaks only with her mind, not with her heart and gut. And I'm speaking now as a woman in public life, so I can identify just a little bit with her. And God knows I have not been through 3/4 of what she's been through as a public elected official. This is a mother who was, when she was in the White House, had to defend her adolescent daughter for going through adolescence and looking like all adolescents look during that period of time. She is a woman that, for whatever her reasons, when she stood by her husband, where her personal life was put out there for everybody to see. So if she's a little bit defensive, she has every reason to be. But watching her last night, it was the first time that I felt, okay, Hillary, you've done it, and now you can be you, and you don't have to be so defensive. She came out, she had little tears in her eyes. I assume everybody saw that, and I said to the TV screen, it's okay, cry. So I just want to point out what it is like to be in public life. As I say, even to have your kid at 13 made fun of on Saturday Night Live or in the press, that you can't help but develop a mechanism that protects you in order to be able to get to the next step. So I'm just sharing my personal feelings about it, and hopefully her heart and her gut is going to come through in this election. I think it came through last night. And so, Don, I have a lot of respect for you, but you're a man and you might not have understood.
I can't let that pass. I am, this coming Sunday, I will be married for 40 years.
Okay, so you understand a little bit.
I am the proud owner of 3 adult daughters and 2 granddaughters. I do, my people do not make males. And so while I cannot identify as a woman, because I am male and I identify as male, I certainly can understand a woman's perspective. And I didn't want to, and it was a little bit awkward, I didn't want to do anything this morning that would detract from the euphoria that many, many women, particularly those of you who are older, and don't take offense of that, who have, struggled for this and have waited for this for a long time. But that doesn't, that in and of itself is not enough for me to support someone who I disagree with on a philosophical end, and and I know it upsets people when I say it, who I find to be dishonest. Now, if you read the Inspector General's report, read the report. Don't rely on these gentlemen or Fox News or CNBC or MSNBC to report on it. Read the inspector's report. You will find that everything that Mrs. Clinton, Secretary Clinton, said publicly about that email server was a lie. Everything she said about the email server was a lie.
Let me say, please sit down. No, please sit down. Please be quiet for a minute. We've all talked about, a lot of you have talked about the need for civility and to bring things, to bring that back to politics. And I just want in closing say, I have a friend who's from Italy who has spent a lot of his adult life having Silvio Berlusconi either running for, being president or running for president or being on trial, but being, and he has cautioned my wife and me that you can't talk about this stuff for more than 20 minutes a day or you go crazy. And I would say, as important as this all is, Election Day is 5 months from today. So I would encourage us all to keep talking to people who disagree with us, and thank you all for coming. Thanks to the panel.